Malcolm Turnbull may be hoping to burnish his nation-building credentials with his pumped hydro proposal for the Snowy as Parliament returns tomorrow. But Bill Shorten obviously hoping to make more of the Fair Work Commission's decision to cut weekend penalty rates for workers in hospitality, retail and in pharmacies. One sign of that was that this afternoon in Melbourne he held a rally to exploit the issue, and it was from there that I spoke to Labor MP Clare O'Neil. Clare O'Neil, good to be talking to you. Clearly the Labor Party thinks it's on a winner over penalty rates, but isn't it the case that unions have done some deals which have seen workers left worse off because of cuts to their weekend pay, for example at Coles?
They put on a rally 2 weeks out.
Well, Jim, just before we get on to the specifics, it's important to note that this week something very important happened in the penalties rate debate, and that is that Malcolm Turnbull nailed his colours to the mast and told us that he is in favour of this decision, which will see a real pay cut for 700,000 of the poorest paid people in this country. Now, the battle lines are drawn. I'm here today at the Williamstown Sea Works, where I'm with hundreds of volunteers, of community members who are here saying that we are opposed to this decision. It is something that Malcolm Turnbull has backed in now. We are very opposed to this and we will fight it to the bitter end. You asked a question about unions making deals about how various pay changes might be made for workers in different sectors. Of course, what you're saying is true, Jim. It's possible for workers to get together and negotiate with their employers to bring down penalty rates. They always offset that, of course, in a way that will make those employees better off over time. The critical thing about the Fair Work Commission decision is that the employees in question are going to be worse off, $77 a week worse off. There are thousands of people who live in my electorate who pay for their bills, their food, their electricity with penalty rates, and this decision will see them much worse off, and that's why I'm going to fight it.
But in the case of this Coles enterprise bargaining agreement, also another one involving fast food workers at KFC, at McDonald's among others, the workers were in fact left worse off in terms of their total weekly pay packet because of cuts to what they were getting on weekends.
Jim, I can't comment on the specifics of those particular agreements, but I can just say that when workers get together and make an agreement with their employer on their work site about how they're going to shift penalty rates, they get a trade-off. This is not about a trade-off. The Fair Work Commission decision is a direct pay cut for 700,000 people in this country. Now, we're in an environment where inequality is at a 75-year high. There are 8 people in this country who have as much wealth as the poorest 4.5 million. And it's decisions like this that will turn our country into one that we simply can't recognise in a generation. Now, the 700,000 people who are getting a pay cut, they are the reason that I and my Labor colleagues get out of bed every morning. Our commitment to stopping this decision for going ahead, for protecting people's rights at work, for protecting their penalty rates is absolutely steadfast.
Another but related subject, do you support the stand of incoming ACTU Secretary Sally McManus backing the CFMEU in breaching laws that it does not like?
Well, Jim, I think I'd put it this way. I don't think Rosa Parks should have given up her seat for a white fellow on the bus back in the civil rights movement, but I think that people in Australia should obey the law. We have a thriving democracy in this country. If people don't like the law, they should work within our processes to try to change it.
Both Bill Shorten and Labor's employment spokesman Brendan O'Connor are very sensitive about this question. They've walked away from it, saying that if you want to change the law, you should work within the democratic system. Did Sally McManus make a mistake?
Look, Jim, I think it's perfectly normal for us to have disagreements about these sorts of things. In the Labor Party, I can say very clearly that we want Australians to obey the law. If they don't like the laws, then they need to work through our processes to change them. But there's one thing that's very important that unites the union movement and the Australian Labor Party, and that is protecting Australians' penalty rates. We do not want to see 700,000 people in this country get a real pay cut, and that's why I'm here today with people from the union movement, but people from all walks of life who are here today saying that inequality in our country has gone far enough, and that we are going to stand up and fight for those people to be able to pay their bills. That's the fair thing to do for working people.
Another subject, Health Minister Greg Hunt gave another hint on Sky News this morning that the government will end the freeze on GP rebates. Clearly that is a victory for Labor's campaign during the last election on the whole Medicare issue.
Jim, the list of attacks on our healthcare system that have come out of the coalition is as long as my arm. And just remember that 3 years ago, this was a government telling every Australian that they were going to have to pay a GP tax every time they went to the doctor. We've got a budget which says they're going to cut $50 billion out of our hospital system. They can say whatever they want about changes to health policy, but the bottom line is that you cannot trust the coalition when it comes to health. Labor is the only party that has consistently stood up for ordinary Australians because we believe it's your Medicare card, not your credit card, which should determine your access to healthcare in this country. Whatever wild changes and shifts in policy the coalition may make from day to day, it doesn't really change the fact that you just cannot trust them to protect our healthcare system in this country.
Now, it was the Gillard government that initially introduced this freeze. What it said was a temporary measure. Do you now regret having let this particular genie out of the bottle?
Look, I wasn't involved in the discussions during the Gillard government because I wasn't a member of parliament at that time. I'd only just say that this was a temporary freeze. It was one-off but part of a broad suite of measures within that government that saw significant increases to health spending over time. So let's look at the big picture, Jim. Labor has consistently stood up and protected our healthcare system. The Liberals have consistently tried to undermine it. And that's why in the last election campaign there were such big concerns that the Australian people had about the protections of Medicare and about the coalition's plan to slash spending for hospitals. But it's not just that, Jim. I honestly won't go through the gory details, but there are dozens of different types of cuts that the coalition have put through that will affect our healthcare system. They're in a bit of a panic. They know that this is costing them in the electorate, but they can't come back from the fact that they've spent the last 4 years that they've been in government trying to undermine our public healthcare system. Even changes to the Medicare freeze probably won't change the perception in voters' minds that they can't be trusted, and that perception is accurate and true.
One final subject before I let you go, that is the question of energy security. You represent a Victorian seat in the federal parliament. Isn't it a mistake by Victoria to ban future onshore gas exploration when the Hazelwood Power Station, which provides 20%, fully 20% of the state's electricity, is about to close? This is not going to make power supplies in Victoria any more secure, and certainly not going to make them any cheaper in the days and years ahead.
Look, I think there's probably pretty broad acknowledgement that the gas companies haven't done themselves too many favours in how they've worked with local communities on these projects, and I think that the Victorian government's decision probably represents that. But the broader picture, Jim, is that there is no current national plan for resolving this energy crisis that the government has told us that we're in. It's clearly a national problem. We've had states right across the country who have had really significant breakdowns in their electricity supply. Labor actually does have a strategy to deal with that, and that is a national interest test for future gas exploration. It is a renewable energy target that will give investors certainty that we're serious about renewables. You know, any Australian can tell the Prime Minister that one of the biggest natural endowments we have is the sunshine, the wind, the wave power that we have across this country. This can be a huge bonus for us. It can be a boon for our manufacturers, but the government continues to not provide the certainty that investors need. And the final important point here is that this is a broader question about our approach to pollution and to climate policy in this country. Labor backs an emissions intensity scheme which will see power prices actually go down over time. Every pretty sensible person in the policy realm is backing this type of notion in at the moment, but the coalition has no plan. It has a ridiculous direct action policy which is the laughing stock of developing countries that are taking serious action on climate. So we need to see these multi-pronged approaches, and what the government has promised so far is paltry. It's not going to go anywhere near to resolving this. And this is a real question about who is going to be able to show national leadership in the face of these crises. At the moment, it's not coming from Malcolm Turnbull and his Liberals.
On the question of Victoria, do you think that Victoria should be taking one leaf out of South Australian Premier Jay Weatherall's book, which is to offer an incentive to landholders? That is, what he's promising is 10% of all royalties from gas on their land would be returned to the landholder. Should something like that be considered in Victoria to overcome the objections that currently exist?
Look, I think the different states are all going to come up with different solutions that suit the particular endowments of energy that they have in their geography. But I would just say, Jim, that the consistent theme here that we're hearing from these states is that they are being forced to go it alone, and that is probably not the best in the best interest of the country. And we have a national energy market. It makes sense to share energy assets across borders, but without national leadership, without a proper approach to that, making that transition to renewable energy, we're not going to see that, and we're going to continue to see states like South Australia. I understand Jay Weatherall's incredible frustration that at one moment being applauded by the coalition government for its innovation and its investment in renewables, we're later seeing the coalition government, smacking them around the chops because they're struggling with what are really national problems. So it's very frustrating for us to see that because Malcolm Turnbull's essentially vacated the field in terms of leadership on this question, the states are having to make their own energy mix plans, and it doesn't make sense for a country like Australia. We need national leadership, and we're not seeing it at the moment from the government.
Claire O'Neill, do appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Jim.